Shabbat Shalom. My guess is that you've spent a lot of time this past week talking about snow. We all know it was supposed to be the biggest snowstorm ever. I heard it called Snowmageddon and Snowpocalypse and Bliznado and every other name you can think of. Whatever you call it, it was everywhere. Reporters gave reports on snow-covered roads, public officials made ominous proclamations in sanitary stations, meteorologists made foreboding forecasts, and I personally received no less than 4 text messages from my mother asking if I was prepared and if I was okay. Mom, if you're watching, I was good. Of course, after all of the coverage of the snowstorm, there was continued coverage about how the thing was covered in the first place. Like I said, we've all spent a lot of time this week talking about and thinking about snow. What's interesting to me is that for a society of people that claims to be so busy, we certainly spend a lot of time anticipating and reliving what's basically a weather pattern that's been around since the beginning of time. We say that we live in the city that never sleeps, and we say things like there aren't enough hours in the day, and yet we spend hours of our day obsessing over things that when all is said and done are really not a big deal. It seems a little silly and a little strange to me. But we love to do this. We love to busy ourselves in semi-interesting topics that are basically peripheral to our existence. They are attention-grabbing at the moment, but in the overall scheme of things, they're completely beside the point. Like I said, it's sort of strange behavior for people that describe ourselves as busy. We always have a million things to do on our to-do list and a million places to be at once, and yet we spend our time on trivial topics. I can provide evidence for you of this engagement in useless distraction with 2 simple words: Deflategate. If you don't know, which I suspect you do know because everybody knows, Deflategate is the theory that the New England Patriots deflated 11 out of 12 footballs by less than 2 tiny inches that they used to win the AFC Championship game. Allegedly, they did this to make the ball easier to grip in bad weather. I don't mean to minimize the issue. Cheaters, if they cheated, should be punished. But this story that is about the pressure per square inch of a football has consumed the national sports media and millions of American minds in the process. This is how you've been spending your time that you call precious, worrying about referees and equipment managers and the size of a football. Don't you have anything better to do? Or here's another example, Michelle Obama's headscarf. Did you see this? She didn't wear a headscarf to the late Saudi monarch's funeral. That was the major news story, not about the nature of his successor, not about his legacy of tyranny or of abuse. It's about her lack of a head covering. Sure, it's interesting. Maybe it's even political. But is the head attire of the First Lady really germane to our everyday existence? I don't think so. My question is, why do we focus on items that are simply ancillary? We are a people that never have just one thing to do. We have 10 things to do. We have a million things to do. We always have emails to answer, text messages to send, news feeds to read. We have jobs where our work has no boundaries. We work while we're out having fun, and we work from home. We work on vacation. We work late at night. We work on our day off. Sitting here in this sanctuary tonight is probably the longest stretch of your entire day where you haven't checked your phone. And that's if you can make it the whole service. I'm watching. We are profoundly busy with everything. So my question is, how do we decide how to allocate our time? At the end of the day, are you happy you binged watched 6 episodes of Kardashian or some other show? I get it. We are all really busy. But busy with what? I'm wondering what is really worth our time. We like to think that this is a new problem inspired by technology, but of course it's not. Moses has the exact same issue. In Torah this week, we read about the people Israel running out of Egypt, away from slavery and into freedom. You know the story. We are so frenzied for time that we can't even bake bread, and because of that, for centuries now, we've been forced to eat dry, tasteless matzah. We are being chased by Egyptians with horses and chariots. We're afraid for our lives. And that's why, in the midst of all that, I was surprised to read this verse, which comes at the very moment of Exodus. Torah says, "Vayikach Moshe et atmot Yosef imo," and Moses took with him the bones of Joseph. So what you're telling me, Torah, is that while Moses was busy trying to save himself and his people from slavery or worse, he casually stopped to pick up some dried bones of a man he never even met, and then he schlepped them across the desert? If you're so concerned with your safety that you can't even hang around to watch some dough rise, why are you going to trek across a desert with bones? I don't know this for sure. I'm not an expert, but I imagine that bones are pretty heavy. I bet that carrying the bones across the country slowed down the journey quite a bit. Imagine if he hadn't taken the bones. Maybe instead of eating crumbly, flaky matzah every Passover, we could be eating biscuits or some delicious bread that did rise. More to the point, maybe Moses could have expedited our freedom rather than laboring to find and move a heavy set of dried up bones. So I asked Moses the same question. I ask all of you, how do you prioritize your time? How do you decide what's important to busy yourself with? Of course, the rabbis pick up on this. They too thought it was surprising that Moses would take his time rescuing the bones of a dead person rather than rescuing hordes of living people. But they say the exact opposite thing. They argue that Moses was doing the right thing with his time. It was the people that were backwards in managing their time. You see, the people were busy looting the Egyptians. They were stealing gold and silver and anything they could get their hands on. But Moses? Moses was busying himself with mitzvot. Moses knew that the children of Israel had made an oath to Joseph, promising to take his bones back to the land of Israel where they belong. Moses knew that silver and gold are fleeting, but Joseph's rest was eternal. He knew that Levayat Hamet, accompanying the dead for burial, is one of the highest mitzvot you can perform. The rabbis teach that Moses wasn't wasting his time at all. He was busy doing exactly what he should be doing, fulfilling mitzvot. And the same is true for us. We shouldn't be busying ourselves with nonsense, spending time on things doesn't make them worth our time. We should be spending our time fulfilling mitzvot however we can. That's the real work of being a Jew. That is your real job. And if you don't know where to start, the rabbis thought of that too. They made a list, and we say this list every Shabbat morning as part of our prayers. We say, Elu devarim she'en lahem shior. These are the mitzvot without limit. They are honoring your father and mother, doing acts of loving kindness, arriving early to study, welcoming guests, visiting the sick, accompanying the dead for burial, providing for the wedding couple, saying prayers with intention, bringing peace between people, and most of all, studying Torah. This is the work in which we all must busy ourselves. As I mentioned, the rabbis explained that the Israelites were involved in looting and in stealing from the Egyptians, maybe as a sort of reparation for their decades of slavery. But do you remember where that got them? They ended up using that gold and silver to make the golden calf, to idol worship, to transgress against God. Which direction are you headed in? Are you more like Moses, busying himself with mitzvot? Or are you more like the rest of the people, gathering material trinkets on the road to worshiping false gods? How can you shift the balance to be closer to the former and farther from the latter? So next time you're so frazzled and frenzied and you think you'll never check that last box on your to-do list, go back to the to-do list of the Jewish people. Go back to the mitzvot. That's the real work of our lives. The rest is a mere distraction. I hope for at least this Shabbat, we can all do more than just busy ourselves. We can busy ourselves in the work of mitzvot. Shabbat Shalom.